so you've been shown the steps to carry out risk assessments. This section now looks at how to rate the risk through the use of the risk matrix. As you can see, the risk matrix consists of 4 parts: likelihood rating, severity rating, evaluation matrix, and finally, risk rating. The purpose of the risk matrix is to allow risk to be rated either low, medium, or high. This in turn will give priority to the most important risks that need controls to be implemented. To show you how the risk matrix works, let's take a look at an example and apply the method. An employee's workstation is cramped, cluttered, and the employee is working on a laptop for approximately 7 hours a day with breaks in between. The chair the employee is sitting on is a cushion chair that cannot be adjusted. Now that I have given you an example, let's go through the method of the risk matrix and rate the risk. A risk matrix score is determined by likelihood by severity, i.e. the likelihood of an event occurring multiplied by its severity. Depending on what the hazard is, it will have one of the likelihood ratings, either unlikely, likely, probable, highly likely, and almost certain. Each of these categories are issued a score from 1 to 5. Similarly, the severity rating can either be categorized as one of the following: insignificant injury, minor injury, moderate injury, major injury, and catastrophic injury, and these are rated from 1 to 5 as well. To aid you in deciding what categories are applicable to your hazard, a description is provided for each category. So having been told what conditions the employee is working in, how would you rate the risk on the previous example? We will now look at working out the risk. The likelihood of the hazard occurring is highly likely, so it is more than likely for the hazard to cause harm and is rated at 4. The reason it is highly likely is that the occupation of majority of employees in SL Controls work on laptops and computers for hours at a time, so it is highly likely as they are used on a daily basis. The severity of the hazard is rated moderate injury, and this means there is a possibility for moderate loss of process, limited damage to property, or moderate injury. For example, minor fracture, severe irritation, serious sprain or strain, and is rated at 3. The reason for selecting moderate injury is people can develop musculoskeletal disorders and have severe pain or irritation due to the cramped conditions. When multiplied together, they give a risk rating of 12, which is medium priority. So controls need to be put in place. As it is a medium risk, a new temporary control measure must be put in place before activity can proceed with permanent control measures put in place as soon as possible. So how do we monitor the implementation of the controls for all risks? We will now take a look at this in the next section, in implementation. To implement something usually means to put a decision, plan or agreement into effect. In hazard identification and risk assessment, it means to put a control in place to reduce the level of risk the hazard poses and prevent it causing harm to individuals and employees. In this section, we are going to take a look at the systems that are used to ensure controls are put in place to reduce the level of risk a hazard poses and ways of monitoring the implementation of the controls. So let's begin. Once you've completed the risk assessment, any potential hazards identified in the risk assessment which needs a control in place must be logged on the risk register. The risk register is an Excel database which documents the hazards and the risks it poses to employees. Using the score from the risk matrix on your risk assessment, the risks are rated either low, medium or high. If the score is medium or high, controls must be put in place. High risks will take priority and must be controlled as soon as possible. On this register, you can document the controls to be put in place or improvements that can be made to existing systems. Let's take a look at what you must complete in this database. This is what a risk register looks like. There is one developed for each SL Control site in Ireland. You can select your site by clicking on the tab at the bottom of the Excel spreadsheet. We will now run through some important aspects of the database which must always be filled out. The date at which the risk was identified must always be filled in, as it gives you a time scale as to how long it has taken to implement a control to that risk. Next, you have the risk assessment number. Each risk assessment carried out is given a risk assessment number. This will change with each risk assessment carried out. Risk details are very important, as it informs you of what risk the hazard poses and the potential way it could harm individuals or employees. The risk rating is achieved by using the risk matrix when carrying out the risk assessment in the first place. Depending on the score from this matrix, the level of risk your hazard poses to employees or individuals will be low, medium or high. These categories are colour-coded, as you can see by the key on the right. If the risk is high, it takes priority. Mitigation measures are suggestions for controls that need to be put in place and also improvements that can be made to the existing systems in place. These will reduce the level of risk your hazard poses. Now that's our risk register done, and our next database we are going to take a look at is our hazard register. The hazard register is another Excel database used to monitor the implementation of controls and ensure they are put in place. Again, it is through your risk register that risks are prioritised on the hazard register. The hazard register suggests the controls to be put in place, when it needs to be completed by, and who is responsible for ensuring the control is implemented completely and closed out. So this is what your hazard register looks like. Again, each SL Control site in Ireland has a hazard register Excel spreadsheet. Let's take a look at how to fill it out. As stated in the previous risk register database section, each risk assessment has a number. For the hazard register, the associated risk assessment number must be put beside the hazard you are documenting, just for referencing purposes. As the hazard register is different to our risk register, you must also state what the hazard is in detail in our hazard register. There are multiple SL Control sites around Ireland, and their offices could be on any floor in a building. The location is very important and has to be specific to where the hazard is and on what floor it is. This just gives the person direction as to where to find the hazard, so that it's easier to put in a control to reduce the risk. Again, just like our risk register, there's a section in the hazard register for stating what risk the hazard poses to employees and individuals. This must be filled in with as much detail as in our risk register. The risk rating is most important in the hazard register. It allows for the prioritisation of risk so that higher risks are dealt with first and lower ones are dealt with at a later date. As the hazard register is a way of monitoring the implementation of controls, a section is included in this database to state what the control or improvements to be made to existing systems are. You must give a good account of these controls or improvements, as the person responsible for ensuring the control is in place follows these details. The status of the control for the hazard will either be open or closed. Open means the control still needs to be put in place, or that the work involved is still ongoing. This will change to closed once the control is in place and checked by the person responsible for implementing the control. Each control which has to be implemented is assigned a responsible person. As you can see here, it is Keith. He has the responsibility to ensure that the coat rack is removed to allow free access to the fire extinguisher and that the area remains clear at all times. Once this has been completed or implemented, only Keith can close out the action. We will now move on to another very important aspect of monitoring safety within ESSA controls, and this is client control.